Behind the sunny snapshots on Instagram and the jovial threads of conversation on Facebook and Twitter, a hidden army of content moderators toils to keep these digital public spaces from descending into the worst the internet has to offer. Sarah Roberts is one of the few people in the world who studies these unseen cleaners. She is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University in London, Ontario, and she joins us now for more. Sarah, it's great to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I never heard of this, I got to confess. Content moderation. Who does this?
Well, it's a hidden practice, and that's why you've never heard of it. It's something that isn't pleasant to talk about. And so the workers who do content moderation are typically shielded from view. They're globally dispersed. You can find them all over the world, from Silicon Valley to the Philippines to working online on sites like Amazon's Mechanical Turk. And they're largely faceless and invisible.
And we need them because why?
Well, as one worker put it to me, without their cleaning of internet sites, the ones you mentioned and many others, the internet for most users would be a cesspool. That's the term he used.
So their job is really to clean up all of the most disgusting filth we can probably imagine and more. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. What got you interested in this?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been online myself for over 20 years, an early adopter to the internet pre-web, when it was a bit of a unknown, and we were kind of inventing the idea of social media as we went along. And at that time, there was a notion that the internet was the site of freedom of expression. It would be the new place for that, the new public square, if you will.
Democratizing the world.
That's right. I'm not sure that's what has turned out to happen. It's actually a commercial marketplace. And so a few years ago, when I was doing my doctoral studies at the University of Illinois, I was reading the New York Times. There was a small blurb in the New York Times, sort of just not a main story by any means, in the text section. And it talked about workers working in rural Iowa. I was in Illinois at the time, land of cornfields, so Iowa resonated with me. And this was farm aid country. This was the land of family farms in the 80s. What people were doing in that part of Iowa now is working in call centers. They were working in the call centers that we usually visualize or imagine to be in other parts of the world. And what they were doing was content moderation. They were doing that practice for very low wages, usually in a setup where they weren't going to have a full-time employment situation perpetually. And as the Times reported, workers were actually having emotional trauma from what they were seeing.
Because they were seeing so much filth.
That's right, and disturbing content.
Do they work directly for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whoever else?
There are a number of ways that content moderation work is set up. It's difficult to talk about it sort of monolithically. So certainly there are employees who do work on site for the firms that you mentioned and others. Those are usually firms that have the finances and the technology on site to handle such a workforce. But even when they do work on site somewhere like that, they're typically contract workers. So they won't be the people with the full Google employee package of benefits. They won't be, as one of them told me, climbing the climbing wall or having a sushi lunch for free. But at the same time, that meant that they also didn't have health insurance.
Why do the companies want this to remain? Because I've read some of your stuff about this, and I think there was only one company that was prepared to go on the record with you, and everybody else pretty much wants this kept in the shadows. How come?
I think there are a few reasons for that. One of the primary reasons is what I was gesturing at just a minute ago, which is that there's this notion that the internet is a democratizing space where information flows freely, or ought to. And the existence of these workers making decisions typically on behalf of the company's best interests really flies in the face of that concept. So that's one reason. Secondly, as I'm sure you found looking into this yourself, it's unpleasant. It's disturbing, it's unsettling, and it takes the fun out of social media when we think about that.
Well, let me follow up on that, because it is the job of these, if I can call them this, internet janitors, to take the worst filth imaginable off the internet, so that when grandma goes onto her granddaughter's Facebook account, she's not completely terrified by what she sees.
Right.
One has to assume that when you watch nonstop that much filth all the time, it takes a toll, does it?
The workers that I talked to certainly indicate that it took a toll on them. I think there are two ways it can go. Some workers came into the job and were unable to stomach the nature of the work, even though they knew something about it beforehand and they'd gone through training, and they just chose to leave the position. Those who stayed on, who did this work day in and day out, actually were finding themselves somewhat inured to the content that they were seeing.
Desensitized after a while.
That's right, which in and of itself is a frightening outcome. At the same time, the workers that I spoke to really had a sense of responsibility and almost altruism around the work that they do. A sense that I'll take this on so that you don't have to. I'll take this on to make this space usable for other people. The thing is that they receive very little acknowledgement or credit for the work they do. They certainly don't have any specialized training, and the pay is very, very low. The workers that I talked to who were in Silicon Valley working for a major, major internet firm, which I cannot name, but we can imagine, were all graduates of the finest universities in the United States.
And this is what they end up doing.
And this is what they're doing. So the issues of the economic situation for young people seeking jobs, the fact that they didn't graduate with engineering degrees, but degrees in the humanities, it led them to this work. And I have to ask, is this the promise of the digital economy that we're offering to the young people?
Do the people who have these jobs, are they offered counseling for all of the bad stuff they end up seeing?
It varies. So there are workers who are in situations where the workplace recognizes the need for that kind of service. Some workers are working in call centers in other parts of the world, thousands and thousands of miles geographically from where the content is produced and where it ends up. And that distance introduces the possibility for a lack of responsibility towards the workers. And then finally, we have workers who do this kind of content moderation in a practice that we should think about in terms of it being digital piecework. So it's a one-to-one process where they come together to review content, and then those who requested it and those who completed the task just never encounter each other again. And there's no way that those people can even access any type of services in a systematic way.
Having talked to the people who do this, have you come away with any conclusions about how long somebody can or should do this before they really start to damage their psyche?
The workers that I spoke to who worked in Silicon Valley were actually contractually only allowed to do this for a total of 1 year, after which time they had to take a 3-month break of some sort, an unpaid break, I might add. And then they were allowed to essentially re-up for another contract of a year. But that was it. The firm that they contracted with and the firm that needed the services, again, a major internet service provider, essentially recognized that burnout was the ultimate outcome of this, and that the moderators would either become so desensitized as to no longer be effective or so traumatized as to no longer be able to stomach the work, neither one of which is a pleasant outcome for workers.
Are they allowed to tell people, outsiders, friends, family, anybody, that they do this work?
Yeah, good question. One of the reasons that I'm so careful about the anonymity and the maintaining the secrecy of the circumstances of the workers that I spoke with is because, by and large, they're covered under non-disclosure agreements or NDAs, and they're absolutely precluded from talking about this work with others. Companies treat the nature of content moderation and the rules by which they moderate their sites as something of an industrial or a trade secret, but also there's this factor that really is a turnoff, and it's a turnoff for all of us who are the users and consumers of this material. So what ends up happening is the workers really can't go anywhere with the experiences they have. And even those that I spoke to who might have considered violating the terms of their NDA to talk to someone else told me that they don't tell anyone else because they don't want to upset the people in their lives with the stories that they have from the trenches of their work. That's how bad it is.
It's so ironic because normally if you'd worked for Facebook for 1 or 2 or 3 years, that's something you'd want to tell people.
Right.
But in this case, no.
Yeah. Many of the young people I spoke to who are doing CCM in the Silicon Valley area really got into it because they were hoping that it would be a sort of a stepping stone into a better job, into the digital economy in the Silicon Valley area. Frankly, it's really sort of use them and turn them out, and it's really almost a scarlet letter on their resume.
More men than women doing this job?
No, not necessarily. It's really hard to say a lot of things conclusively about the demographics of these workers because it's such a secretive practice, and it's split across many industries around the world. So there's the call centers, there's the big internet firms, there's boutique firms that operate almost like advertising agencies, and then there's all this contract labor that comes and goes. But I think it's safe to say that a cross-section of global labor is represented in CCM work.
Right after this program tonight, we're going to, on TVO, play a documentary called Facebookistan. And we just want to play a little snippet of it here, and then I'll get you to react to it. This is a content moderator discussing how much she is paid for doing what she does. Sure. Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
So the task was based on payment on the content reviewed. The basic hourly rate was $1, but if we are able to moderate 4,000 photos per hour, that would be $4 per hour. So that would be 0.9 seconds per photo.
What do we know about her?
Well, it sounds about right. I mean, it sounds about typical in terms of workers who are working in other parts of the world other than North America doing this type of work. I was in the Philippines last summer speaking with content moderators there who worked for large-scale global outsourcing firms, and their rate of pay worked out to about $400 a month. So
for how many hours work?
For full-time work.
Full-time work, $400 a month.
Yeah.
For full-time work.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, what she said, that she gets less than a second to look at something before making a determination of whether it stays or goes?
Yeah. If we think about the volume of content that's being produced, we can begin to understand the rates of speed at which it has to be processed by humans. And I should point out here that this is work that computers cannot do.
I was going to ask that. Algorithms can't figure this out.
It's too complex. The nuances of language, cultural norms, rules and regulations, legal regimes, and all these things come to bear so quickly, and it's something that really only the processing power of the human mind can pull off today. And so the workers find themselves working at a very, very fast pace to process all this content. I was just looking at some statistics to make sure I had it right, because every time I look, I'm shocked. But it is the fact that YouTube alone receives 300 hours of video per minute per day. So the volume, the sheer volume of content means that it's a split-second decision-making process for most of these workers.
Any guess how many people are actually employed doing this around the world?
I've seen various figures, and again, I think I would stress that it's a guess because industry won't tell us. Yeah. But I've seen figures as high as 100,000 people.
Whew.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'm wondering how they get their marching orders. I mean, is there a textbook or something they look at that says, you got to snip this, this can stay?
Yeah. Typically, the rules around what stays and what goes comes from the firm that needs the moderation. And so that means that different sites and different platforms have different tolerances for types of material. Sometimes a site thrives on prurient or material that may just straddle the line between bearable and unbearable. That kind of content can drive eyeballs to sites, whereas other more mainstream sites may have stricter rules and guidelines around what is allowed to stay. All of this is highly dependent on cultural and social norms in the place in which they expect their audience to be. So if you think of a case of something like Facebook, they're constantly getting feedback, negative feedback in the news because they will remove pictures of women breastfeeding, highly benign and typically non-sexual material that comes down almost instantly, whereas other kinds of sexualized content stays. So it's highly reflective of both a firm's ability to withstand the risk for having that kind of content, its desire to draw viewers or participants based on more risque content, and then a cultural context.
Let me give you one other specific example. And there was a time when there was sort of a spate of ISIS beheadings, right, and some of this stuff got through, right?
Right.
I'm not going to mention sites, but some of this stuff got through.
Right.
How is it that didn't get scrubbed?
I think that's a great question. We've all had these experiences of an errant click leading us to something we wish we could unsee, and those beheading videos are probably top of mind for many of the people watching this program. In some cases, content will stay up even if it's violent or disturbing because it has a political dimension. So that's another angle that we have to think about too. Companies exist in political environments. They may have agendas, whether they're aware of it or not, that support or otherwise uphold the values of the place where they're located. So some workers that I spoke to, again, in the Silicon Valley firm, noted that the Syrian war zone footage that they were getting was allowed to stand, even though it was some of the very most disturbing content any of them had ever seen. Whereas footage that was coming through, possibly also for reasons of advocacy or wanting to have global support from others, that was coming through from the Mexican drug wars, was constantly taken down. And the workers themselves saw a disconnect there and pointed out to me that it may have been an issue of US policy that was coming into play there. So if we think about being in a moment where the actual public sphere is constantly being encroached upon and shrinking, and the message seems to be that sites like YouTube and Facebook will take up the space, we actually realize that there are profound political dimensions to what those companies do, certainly economic ones as well. And that really isn't a substitute for the public sphere and the public sector.
Let me pick up on that angle of government policy, though, that you just raised. We do have freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean you can scream fire in a crowded theater or libel somebody, etc.
Right.
Governments everywhere have passed regulations and laws governing that. In the same way, do we need, in your view, government to step in here and pass some kind of far-reaching regulations saying what should or should not be scrubbed from the internet?
I'm not sure that's going to make sense in this moment. I think we have bigger problems than just simply regulating the speech at a government level. First of all, these are private entities, and they do have certain leeway to allow content, whether or not it's disgusting to most people. But I think the bigger issue here is trying to figure out adequately and accurately what role these companies and their platforms ought to take before we go to that next step. And that's the problem right now, that it's ambiguous and it's unclear. And I think a lot of these platforms are responsible for muddying the waters. On the one hand, suggesting that they ought to be seen as important or as critical as other kinds of public agencies and other, I'm thinking about libraries, for example, other kinds of bodies that are in the public sector, while at the same time they want total autonomy and they want the ability to make profit at an alarming rate. I think Google trades at something like $730 a share.
Incredible.
That doesn't have the same resonance for me as a public institution does. So I think we have to get to grips with what we actually want from these platforms and companies, and then figure out where we want them to be in our social fabric. And that still has to be decided.
Let's play one more clip on that. And to that end, here's the inventor of the internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, on the internet and democracy. Roll tape, please.
If you are not connected to the internet, how is your voice going to be heard? How are you going to make sure that the values which you think are important are being represented by all the governments out there? It's 25 years on. We need to think about the next 25 years to make sure that we establish the principles that the web's being based on.
All right, so apropos of the question I just asked, where do we find that balance between the need for free speech and free and fair exchange of ideas and trying to get some of this filth off the internet?
Well, I think one thing we ought to be able to do is have a more complete reckoning of the way in which the material we consume online is actually produced. And so what my research aims to do in part is to shed light on this unknown group of actors who actually do have incredible decision-making power in terms of just that. We know, in fact, that it really isn't a relationship of user to platform to world, although YouTube used to have a slogan not so long ago retired of broadcast to the world, right? But it isn't that simple. So there are all kinds of actors and agents with all kinds of agendas intermingled in that process of creation and dissemination. I think we need to understand who they are and have a more full picture and portrait of what that process looks like before we decide where we're going to go policy-wise. We certainly know that there are state agents in there. For example, the NSA is in the mix, controlling and surveying content as it passes through the internet and making all kinds of decisions, policy and otherwise, based on that. And these workers are another group that need to be accounted for, as well as as you put it, the marching orders they receive. We need to understand where those come from and what the implications are before we can make some of these kinds of big sweeping decisions for the next decades.
Have you, in the course of doing your research, sat with content moderators and watched them do their work?
I have not, and that was a conscious decision on my part.
You didn't want to see it?
I know I can't take it.
You can't handle it.
As I said, I've been on the internet for over 20 years, and there was a time early on when it was fairly easy to make an errant click and see something that you wish you could have unseen. I was pretty young at that time too, and there were times that happened to me. I still remember content that not only should I not have seen it, it maybe shouldn't have even been made.
This is a bell you can't unring.
Yeah, you can't. So I made a decision early on that I wouldn't do that, that I would base my research on what the workers were willing to share with me, which often meant that I was very cautious about asking them to recount, what is the most horrible thing you've dealt with in the work you've done. But invariably, that came out in our discussions anyway.
Well, I've read your stuff, so I know what it is that they've snipped out. And I don't even think I can say it on the air. It's kind of, so let me ask you just finally, we'll finish up on this. Do you think, having looked at this, content moderators on the internet are necessary?
Yes, they're absolutely necessary. They're necessary from a number of perspectives. But if you were to ask Google, Facebook, Instagram, or any of the other platforms out there who are reluctant to discuss this, I think they would tell you that it's necessary for their business practices too. That's why it's so profoundly disturbing to me that the labor that these people do goes unheralded and unknown, unrecognized, and certainly not properly compensated.
A little less unknown today, thanks to you.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're grateful you came in tonight and shared your views with us. Sarah Roberts from the Faculty of Information and Media Studies, Western University in London, Ontario. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks very much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.